Science Director at the Harris Center for Conservation Education, which is based in the Monadnock region of Southwest New Hampshire. For those of, we've got people from all over the place here, which is wonderful. So for those of you who might not know the Harris Center, we are a nonprofit organization, and our work is helping people fall in love with the natural world through land protection, conservation research, and education for all ages. So if you are local to the Monadnock region, you might be interested to know we have protected more than 24,000 acres of land from development. Much of that is open for hiking and other recreation. We coordinate conservation research on that land and also throughout the region through community science projects like the one you are going to get trained for tonight. And then really at the heart of everything we do is education for all ages, from babies in backpacks to retirement, residents of retirement communities, and kind of all points in between. So if you're new to us, especially in this new era when we're having all these wonderful Zoom talks, this is a real silver lining of the pandemic, is this transition to Zoom, so people can join us from all over the place. We've got incredible spring programming coming up. So I would encourage you to visit harriscenter.org and check out all the events that we have coming up. If you ever, none of what we do would be possible without our donors. So if you are a Harris Center supporter, I want to say thank you. And if you're not yet, I encourage you to check us out. So tonight I want to introduce two other people who are part of tonight's program. The first is Miles Stammen. He's our office manager and Zoom guru, and he's going to share some tips for having a good Zoom experience. And one other person I want to introduce is Karen Seaver. She's our staff ecologist. She is geared up in her reflective vest and ready to hit the streets tonight if she gets the word from some volunteers who are out there that the frogs are moving, because it's actually some marginally good weather for amphibians tonight. So Karen, do you want to just say hello to everyone?
Hello, great to see so many of you here tonight. And thanks so much for stepping up for nature. Great to see you all. Feel free to send any questions you have my way as well. Take it away, Brett.
All right. So tonight's training is multiple parts. So we're going to start with talking about the amphibian migration and the phenomenon of big night, where it fits in the life of a spotted salamander as one of our kind of poster child species. We're going to talk a bit about species identification, how to identify the different critters you might see out and about on a rainy spring night. Then we'll talk about how the Salamander Brigades work for those of you who want to go out and do this. And we will have time for questions at the end. So people are from all over. So I should say that, that we coordinate these crossing brigades in an active way locally here in the Monadnock region. So much of what you'll hear tonight will apply whether you live in Rhode Island or Vermont or Northern New Hampshire. Some facets of the discussion about the crossing brigade program itself will be a little bit more focused on the Monadnock region, but I will provide some tools for those of you who don't live local to us to find crossings on your own and to get going in your own communities. So I always like to think of these trainings as an invitation to what, in my opinion, is one of the most magical times of the natural year. And it all kind of starts with a myth. And it's a mythology that environmental educators really like to share, this myth. And it kind of goes something like this. So after a long, cold, snowy winter, the snow starts to melt, things start to warm, the earth starts to thaw out. We have a few weeks of like beautiful, warm spring temperatures, and all the snow goes away. And then one afternoon, it starts to rain. And it rains all through the afternoon and into the night. And temperatures are in the 40s or 50s. And on this one big night with all this rain, this first big night of rain, all of the spotted salamanders and all of the wood frogs and all of the spring peepers move across the landscape on this one big night to vernal pools and other wetlands where they breed. And the myth is that it happens on this one big night. We call the myth Big Night. You'll hear me talking about big nights all the time. And the magic in the myth is all true. There is a really incredible migration that happens every spring right underneath our noses, whether we realize it or not. The myth is that it doesn't usually happen on just one big night. Most of the time we have a few big nights and a few medium nights and a smattering of small nights here or there. And it really all depends on the weather. So this time of year, and the question I get asked the most often is, when will the amphibians migrate? In fact, somebody called me today from Concord, Massachusetts, who wanted to know if the salamanders were going to be migrating tonight in Concord, Mass. And I can't really tell you. I especially can't tell you ahead of time. So I would love to be able to say it's April 15th. Pencil it in on your calendars. Be there or be square. We're gonna head out. But really, it's all weather dependent, and the variables change so dramatically from one location to another that I can't tell you what's happening in Concord, Mass, really, because it could be very different from what's happening in Keene, New Hampshire, where I am. But what we're looking for are three things coming together that spur this amphibian migration. The first is thawed ground with minimal snow cover. So these are animals who spend their winter underground. In the case of spotted salamanders, they're so far underground that they're below the freeze line. So even if everything else is perfect above ground for them, they won't get the message if the ground is still frozen. So this is the first thing, and this is what we're waiting for right now in the Monadnock region and parts of Vermont and certainly further north. The next thing is warm nighttime temperatures. These are ectotherms, cold-blooded animals who don't move very fast or at all with temperatures in the 30s. So we typically are looking for temperatures 40 and above. 45 is perfect. Tonight here in Keene, it's about 39 degrees. So there could be some very cold wood frogs making their move tonight. They're particularly cold hardy species, but really what we're looking for are temperatures above 40 after dark, because this is happening at night. This is a nocturnal phenomenon. So it doesn't matter if it's 45 degrees in the day. If it's 37 degrees after dark, there won't be moving much. And then of course, rain. These critters need to stay moist, and rain is what really spurs them on. But I always include a little asterisk there, because really all three of these have variations and variables that, especially early in the season, vary quite a bit. So if we've had a long, dry spring, some frogs especially might make their move without a heavy rain, but in a heavy mist or fog, because they get tired of waiting. If it's really warm and really humid, they might go. There's a lot of variability here, but this is what we are looking for. A perfect classic big night will be rain starting in the afternoon, lasting through the night, 45 degrees. What we get a lot of are weather forecasts that say 40% chance of rain, or 80% chance of rain at 7 p.m., but only a 30% chance of rain at 10 p.m. And so there's a lot of prognostication and trying to predict what happens. But when it all comes together, it can result in this really explosive, magical night with thousands of animals on the move all at the same time. And I always like to kind of talk about it in the bigger context of these animals' lives, because we're out here for these few nights a year, but where does this fit in? What does this mean to them? And so this is kind of a year in the life of the spotted salamander, who is our poster child, as it were. And I love this picture. It's quite misleading because it makes it look like they're just tromping through fields of snow. This was probably a snowbank on the side of the road, because these animals, these particular species, don't survive freezing and don't tolerate very cold temperatures, but they will cross a snowbank or two. So on a night, on a big night, they kind of emerge from underground, migrate across the landscape, typically less than a quarter mile, but that's quite far if you've got tiny legs. I love this picture my friend Dave took, because the mud that is caked on the face of this salamander shows that it has just emerged from underground. It is the mud from last year that is all over its face, and it hasn't been washed away by the rain just yet. So these animals, I should say, they can live upwards of 20 or 30 years, which is quite remarkable. 95% of that time they're underground. So big night is really our best chance to see them. So they are migrating, and people are always asking, well, where are they going? Why did the salamander cross the road, right? So they are headed to their breeding wetlands. The first thing they do when they emerge from the ground after the long winter is not eat It is breed. It is heading to their breeding wetlands. And in many cases where they're going are vernal pools, which are depressions in the forest floor that fill with melting snow and spring rain. And this is a classic example of a vernal pool, a picture from the Vernal Pool Association. This is what our vernal pools look like right now, more or less. The thing to look at is that branch in the middle there, that down tree. So this is what that vernal pool is going to look like in about a month. You can see it's thawed out completely, but the water level has dropped quite a bit. And that's because it's warming, evaporation is happening, but also trees are starting to leaf out and they're pulling a lot of water out of the ground, a lot of groundwater. So the water level is shrinking, but this is prime time for vernal pools. This is where spotted salamanders and wood frogs, they're laying their eggs. By the end of the summer, that pool looks like this, completely dry. And that's important because what it means is that fish cannot survive in these pools. And that's important because fish eat amphibian eggs and amphibian larvae. And so these species who breed in vernal pools have really adapted to an environment that has few predators in it. And they have a very strong attachment to place. Many of them are returning to the exact same pools year after year. In many cases, it's the pool where they themselves hatched from an egg. So we could have a spotted salamander coming back for 20 years to the exact same place. And that means that there are patterns on the landscape that we can start to predict because they're appearing in the same place every year. Once they get to the pool, they do something known as congressing, which is swimming about. It kind of looks like a whole lot of nothing. So I think it's funny that it's called congressing, but they are swimming around. This can happen on the big night. It can happen the next few nights. If it's very cold, if we get a drop in the temperature, they'll hang out for a while and wait. And they're swimming around in the pools, and the males are, during this, swimming down to the bottom of the pool and depositing what are called spermatophores. These are packets of DNA, packets of sperm attached to the leaf litter. And somehow the females are choosing the ones that they want to fertilize their eggs. They are going down and they're actually absorbing the spermatophores the females are absorbing the spermatophores into their cloaca to fertilize their eggs internally. So they may or may not come into any contact with one another, the male and the female salamanders in this case. They might, but it's not necessary. And one study in Ithaca, New York found that 70% of the spotted salamander egg masses in their study had mixed paternity. So they were choosing spermatophores from different males. They look like breadcrumbs, really. This picture makes them look quite large, but they're small. And this is a picture my friend Dave took of a female spotted salamander laying her eggs, which I think is pretty amazing. So these eggs, once they are deposited, they start to absorb water, they get a little bigger, and they take from 4 to 8 weeks to hatch, depending on temperature and some other factors. They're often laid communally in clusters, which is a really cool thing to search for. If you find really big puddles in the woods, they may have these gems just sitting in there waiting for you to find them. When they hatch, you have a salamander larvae. This salamander larvae is holding on to what's called a fingernail clam, which is about half the size of my pinky fingernail for scale, quite small. And they're voracious predators that eat a lot of mosquito larvae and other invertebrates in the vernal pool. And they take another 2 to 3 months to mature. And during this time, they're going through a lot of growth and a lot of changes to the, what you see in this picture, these are their gills. They have external gills. And when they first hatch, they have no legs. So they have to grow legs and lungs in order to be ready for life on land.
Brett, we do have a question.
Yeah.
How long between the female's absorption of the spermatophore and the egg laying?
Ooh, that is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you that it takes a few days for egg masses to start to appear in pools. So typically the males will actually be the first to migrate. So sometimes in the early season, we'll only have males in the pool and they'll be waiting in there for females. So there won't be any eggs until the next migration happens and the females arrive. Once the females arrive, egg masses can start to appear within a few days. So I don't know exactly. I don't think it's very long though. I don't know if Karen, did you have any anything to add to that?
I
No.
agree. I think it's just a few days.
Yeah.
You know, it's all, they're not leaving the pool in between.
Right. They're hanging out in the pool. And in some cases, the adults will stay in that pool for more than a month, just hanging. You won't see them. The only way you'll really see them in the pool is if you go out at night with a bright flashlight on a big night or the few nights afterwards, and you can see them swimming around and congressing. But otherwise in the daytime, they're mostly hanging out under the leaf litter at the bottom, and they're very hard to find. So the larvae will be in that pool for 2 to 3 months, or until the pool dries out and the larvae all die, which happens some years. So for them, it's really important to be able to return to the pool year after year, because sometimes in dry years, there's kind of catastrophic breeding failure and none of the young make it. And that's why these species have kind of evolved to be more long-lived. You get more chances if you keep coming back year after year. And then in late summer, you get these adorable little things that may emerge from the pool. These are the juveniles. They're ready for life on land. That's my hand for scale. That was one we found out behind the Harris Center a few years ago. And they will kind of disperse into the surrounding woods and be there for 2 to 5 years before they reach reproductive maturity. And then one rainy night, the cycle begins again. So we'll talk about this a bit more, but you can see this salamander's on a road, and in places where salamanders have to cross roads to get from the woods where they spend most of their time to the pools where they breed, that's where that's a conservation concern for them. It's a pretty grave conservation concern. We'll talk about more a little bit later, but that's where we're going to come in.
The questions keep coming in.
Okay.
You mentioned it previously, but the lifespan of a salamander?
Well, every species is a little different, but spotted salamanders, they can live upwards of 20 to 30 years if they're not eaten by an owl or hit by a car.
And how many eggs do they lay?
That's a great question. So they lay masses of eggs grouped together. So it's a little different species to species, but spotted salamanders can lay a few hundred eggs in a mass, and an individual female can lay one primary mass and then sometimes 1 or 2 what are called satellite egg masses that are a little smaller each year. So a few hundred eggs, but they're grouped together in that kind of gelatinous cluster.
That seems like a lot. How many of those are going to survive?
Very few, very few. I don't know the statistics on salamanders, but I did read one study that said 1 in 1,000 wood frog eggs will make it to adulthood.
Wow.
And a wood frog egg mass typically can have 1,000 or 1,200 eggs in it. So 1 per mass, if they're lucky, will make it out.
And then someone was asking about males versus females. How do you tell the difference?
This again depends on species. During migration time with spotted salamanders, you can kind of tell because the females have already developed their eggs, and so they are quite wide, wider than the males. And also this is very rude, but if you turn the salamander over and stare at its underside, the males will have what's called a cloacal protuberance, which basically means a little swelling at their cloaca where the spermatophores will come out. And so you can sometimes see that as well, but there's no easy way to tell just from looking at a distance or anything like that. With wood frogs, you can tell it's a little bit different. We'll talk about wood frogs in a few.
I think we have one more salamander question.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the cryptic female choice over spermatophores? How do they determine which is from a high quality male?
I don't know the answer to that. I've wondered that myself. I don't know if anyone's done research onto that. How do they pick? Do they sit back and watch some of the congressing that's happening? Salamanders communicate very strongly through smell and through pheromones and chemicals. So that may be part of it. But I don't know the answer to that one.
Thanks.
All right. Are we good to? So we're going to transition into our species ID part of the night. So spotted salamanders are one of the species you will see on big nights. They're not the only species. And so we're going to talk about how to identify the ones that you see. So our spotted salamander, of course, is very distinctive. You are not likely to mistake it for anything else. It's a grayish salamander, can grow to be 8 to 10 inches long, as thick as my thumb or thicker. And of course, they have bright yellow polka dots, which are very distinctive. As I said, they spend most of their lives underground. So many people have never seen one before unless you're going out like we do on these rainy nights. They also have extremely charming smiles that are very endearing, that endear people to them quite a bit. And I actually have a spotted salamander here, if you can believe it. Let's see if he wants to come out. It's a small one. This is a pretty small one. I don't know if should I stop screen share, Miles, so people can see? Yeah, let me stop screen share for a minute. All right, so if you want to, this is a little guy. How can I show it? There we go. So this is a small size spotted salamander. This one is being overwintered by one of our naturalists because it showed up in somebody's unfinished basement at the beginning of the winter and we couldn't put it back out. It's too cold. But you can see this one's tired and slow, but you can pick them up pretty easily around their middle. We're going to talk about handling amphibians and hold them also in two hands like this. It's hard to show on a screen, unfortunately. And this guy's getting dirt all over my keyboard, so I may put him back, but here we go. There's a good little view. So this is a pretty small one. I don't even think this may not be a full adult at this size in my hand. It's hard to see. I'm gonna put him back because he doesn't like me. He doesn't like being on a TV screen. They're not toxic. I see that question, are they poisonous? So poisonous typically refers to animals that can, I'm gonna get it wrong. Poisonous is animals that if you eat them, they will make you sick. So yes, in that case, they might be. I wouldn't recommend licking or eating a spotted salamander because they do sometimes produce a defensive goo, but they're not venomous. They can't inject you like a bee can with any kind of toxin. So they're not harmful to handle. They occasionally will secrete a whitish goo if they feel that you're a predator. So I'm going to go back to screen share. I do see the question about the oils on our hands. This is a question I get asked all the time, and it's a myth that the oils on our hands harm salamanders. What is not a myth is that if we have anything toxic on our hands, meaning hand sanitizer, first and foremost, you should not handle them with hand sanitizer on your hands or perfume or lotion or bug spray or sunscreen or any of that stuff. That can harm them because they have porous skin and they're very sensitive to pollutants and toxins in the environment. So you should handle them always with clean hands and preferably wet hands because they are sensitive to drying out. When you're out on a road on big night, you're going to be wet. So that's not as much of an issue. But it's a myth that the oils on our hands harm them. Okay, so are there other salamander questions before I move on to some other species ID? I know there's a bunch of stuff lighting up in the chat, but I haven't been able to monitor it quite so.
Tail dropping, do they lose their tails?
Some salamanders do, and that is a reason you should never pick them up by their tails. Redback salamanders are known for this. They can drop their tails as a defense mechanism to distract a predator and then scurry away and eventually regrow a tail after some time. Spotted salamanders don't typically do that.
And are Jefferson and yellow spotted salamanders found in the same vernal pond locations?
Yes, we're going to talk about Jeffersons in a minute, but Jeffersons are much less common and not found in nearly as many places, but they do coexist in the same vernal pools for sure. Okay. All right. We're going to move on from spotties for a moment because they are not the only stars of the show. We have three species that you are most likely to see on an early spring night, at least in Southwest New Hampshire and probably in some of the places where other folks are from too. We've got our spotted salamanders. The next one is our wood frogs. That's these guys. They are grow to be about 3 inches long. This picture makes them look very big. They're smaller than the palm of my hand, but about half the size of the palm of my hand. They can be brown or orange in color. The females tend to be more orange. The distinctive thing to identify a wood frog is that dark mask behind their eye, kind of like a bandit's mask. That's very a key identifying characteristic. And they also, once they get to their pools, they make a very distinctive sound. The males do anyway. The males are singing and they sound like this. Perhaps you've heard this. Perhaps you thought it was ducks in the middle of the woods. That's a recording I made in Robin Hood Park in Keene. They migrate at night, but they will sing like that starting in the afternoon and continuing through the evening, typically for a few weeks, only when it's warm enough. And that's courtship. They're singing as part of their courtship. This slide is to remind me to tell you about their superpower, which is that they survive winter by freezing solid. Their heart stops beating, their lungs stop breathing, and they produce a sort of natural antifreeze, and they just wait in a state of suspended animation for spring. And because of this, they're able to overwinter very close to the surface of the forest floor, maybe just a few inches below the surface of the forest floor. And that is relevant for us because it means they tend to emerge earlier in the spring. So if you've only got 3 inches of ground thawed, wood frogs might be out and about, but spotted salamanders won't be because they need to overwinter below the freeze line because they cannot survive freezing. Oh, and this is just a picture. They also do communal egg laying. This is some wood frogs in a vernal pool. And I love this picture because she's laying her eggs like right at the moment that the photo was taken. I forgot to tell you, I will be quizzing you. Oh, and I forgot the first poll, which was I wanted to see where everybody was from, but I guess we don't need that because people said a bit in the chat. But we are going to have polls where we quiz you, so pay attention on species ID in particular. So the third of the big 3 early spring amphibians that you are likely to see at any crossing site is this one, and you are going to tell me what it is when you hear it. Let's see if anyone's putting it in the chat. Yes, all right. This is our spring peeper. These are very small animals that make a very large sound. They've been recorded at the same kind of decibels as rock concerts or chainsaws at close range. And it's possible for a male peeper to make 3,000 to 4,000 peeps per hour for several hours at a time. For many of us, this is the sound of spring, right? What many people don't know is that these are very small frogs, much easier heard than seen. So they grow to be about 1 inch or 1.5 inches long only. People often think they're seeing baby frogs on the road when it's really full-grown adult peepers. And so they are tan or yellowish in color. They have a cross. Some of them have this cross on their back. That's how they got their Latin name, Pseudocris crucifer, bearing a cross, which is not present on all peepers, but is there for many of them. And another distinctive thing about them is these suction cup toes. Can you guys see my pointer, my cursor? Yeah. So they've got toe pads, which is because they are tree frogs and these help them climb. So if you find a small tan frog that has suction cup toes, you've got a spring peeper. And this is just for scale, just to see. This is a lot of these pictures, I should say, have been taken over the years by our Crossing Brigade volunteers out on the roads. And this is one of them. So that's just to give you a sense for how big they are or how not big they are. So at most of our sites on an early spring night, those are the 3 species you're likely to see. At some of our sites, you will also see a 4th species. And some of you were already asking questions about this one, the Jefferson salamander. This salamander is related to the spotted salamander in the same family, but is different, visibly different. For one thing, it's smaller. So while spotted salamanders can reach 8 to 10 inches in length and are kind of hefty, not the little guy I had here, Jefferson salamanders only get to be about 5 to 7 inches long, and they are a little bit more kind of, they move fast, you know, they're a little bit harder to pick up. They're also obviously do not have yellow spots. They have a gray or brown skin with light pale blue flecking. They have long toes, as you can see in this picture, and they also have kind of flatter tails that are more like a rudder. There's also another related salamander, the blue spotted salamander, that has darker skin and bright blue flecking. And in places where Jefferson salamanders and blue spotted salamanders coexist, they frequently hybridize. And it is actually impossible to tell from looking at them which one they are, whether they're a Jefferson or a hybrid. You have to do genetic testing to suss that out. It's a very complicated genetic relationship. The Jefferson blue-spotted hybrids have these all-female lineages that practice what's called kleptogenesis, klepto meaning stealing, genesis, genetic material. So they use spermatophores from true Jefferson salamanders or true blue-spotted salamanders to fertilize their eggs and initiate egg development, but none of the genetic material from those male salamanders is passed along to the offsprings. It's pretty wild. And we say Jefferson salamanders, but really what we mean is Jefferson complex, because it's assumed that here in Southwest New Hampshire, as well as in most of Massachusetts and Vermont, that what we have are the hybrids. And if you're local, Jordan, Road, and Keene has a population of these. They also sometimes turn up at our Westmoreland crossings. So those are our early spring amphibians. But as the temperatures warm and spring wears on, we have other critters that are out and about on warm, rainy nights, and you might see some of them out on the road. The first one in the top left up here is probably a salamander that you're all quite familiar with. Bright orange, very distinctive appearance, has those orange or red spots running down the back with black circles. This is, of course, your red eft that is out and about in the woods on every rainy, misty day in the summer. What some people don't know is that those efts are actually the juvenile form of the eastern newt, which is fully aquatic as a breeding adult. So they have a really complicated life history where they hatch as eggs and are aquatic larvae with gills, kind of like the spotted salamander larvae we saw. They metamorphose into red efts, and they kind of head out for life on land for 2 to 7 years. They wander widely through the woods, and then the time comes when everything changes. Their color changes to an olive green. Their skin changes from very thick to keep them protected and moist on land to skin that's thin and can absorb oxygen through the water. And they turn into the adult form of the eastern newt that lives in lakes and ponds and beaver wetlands. And they can live another 10 years in that way. You're not likely to see adult newts on roads at night because they're almost fully aquatic. But, and you don't see a ton of red efts because they're primarily diurnal or day active, but occasionally we see some wandering around at night. The next one is our probably most common salamander, though maybe not one that people see as often as red efts, and that is this guy on the bottom, the red-backed salamander. They are the ones you find in your wood piles or under any log in the woods. They are as long as my pinky and about half as thick. They're really distinctive with the rust red stripe down their back and their very small legs. They are very difficult to pick up off of the road because they lay flush to the ground. The easiest way to pick them up, if you happen to see one and want to move it to safety, is with a data form or some sort of piece of paper that you slide under it to help move it. It's very difficult to pick them up with your fingers. At some of our sites, we have this fourth salamander down below later in the spring. That is our four-toed salamander. This is a swamp salamander that breeds in sphagnum moss swamps. So we don't see it a lot on the roads, but Forest Lake Road in Winchester, they get a bunch of these out every year. They get that name because they have 4 toes on all 4 feet, but I don't recommend that you try to look at their toes in order to identify them because they're very tiny and you probably won't be able to count them. Instead, what I do, if I see a salamander that looks a little different, they're again kind of the same size as redbacks, like pinky sized. I look at that constriction at the base of the tail. Looks like a bottleneck. This is a salamander that will let go of its tail if it feels threatened. And that constriction allows that to happen more easily. They also have a black and white speckled belly that you can sometimes see. And one more that we occasionally see, this guy, the 2-line salamander, another very small salamander, kind of pinky size or smaller. This is a stream salamander. So again, not common on the roads, but I see them. I live in Harrisville, New Hampshire. I see them on the roads sometimes on really warm nights. They're yellowish in color and they've got those 2 distinctive long lines running the length of their body. So all of these, I should mention, are on amphibian ID sheets that you can download on our website. So if you don't remember everything, you can bone up before heading out.
And 2 quick questions for you.
Yes.
Someone was wondering about walking in the woods during the winter when all these animals are under our feet. Do we need to be real careful when we're out there?
In the winter, they are tucked away, safe and sound. So they're far below any impact that you could have on them when the ground is solid. In the summer, when it's raining, you might want to watch your step. Yeah.
And then Kristen was wondering, do frogs eat salamanders? And I guess that begs the question, who is eating who?
That's a great question. And it depends on the frog and it depends on the salamander. Bullfrogs will eat just about anything. In a vernal pool, salamander larvae are more likely to eat wood frog tadpoles than the other way around. Wood frog tadpoles are largely herbivorous and eating algae and such, but salamander larvae are carnivores. But wood frog tadpoles tend to hatch out more quickly and so get a head start on size so that they can kind of escape the gape of the spotted salamanders. Most salamanders primarily eat invertebrates, earthworms and beetles and crickets and such. Frogs also eat a lot of invertebrates, but bullfrogs in particular are predators of anything that they can fit in their mouth. So that would include salamanders for sure. So also, just like we have more salamanders as it gets warmer, we have more frogs as it gets warmer. And some of them are truly migrating to breeding wetlands and others are simply dispersing or hunting or foraging or just enjoying the rain. But here's some that you might see. One of my favorites in the top left here is this guy, the gray tree frog. They can range in size widely. Young tree frogs can be 1 inch long and large tree frogs can be 3 inches or more. And they range in color quite a bit too. Young ones can be like a mint green. And as adults, they tend to be more grayish, but they look like bark. They live on bark. They eat insects that live on bark and they are highly adapted for life in trees. And so that is a way to tell if you see a gray bumpy frog that looks like bark, it's probably a gray tree frog. And they also, because they're a tree frog, have these toe pads, the suction cup toes. So it's easy to kind of look for that. Top right, we've got the pickerel frog. These are very distinctive because they have these rectangular shaped spots on their back. And people often mistake them for what they think are leopard frogs. We occasionally will get reports of leopard frogs, and I usually question those because the leopard frogs in Southwest New Hampshire are very uncommon, but pickerel frogs are very common. But leopard frogs get more press or something. People seem to know them, but they don't know pickerel frogs. But leopard frogs have very round spots, and pickerel frogs have these boxy brown spots. And you can also see the males have during the breeding season, a yellow groin, which who knows why, but that's helpful for identification. The bottom two are frogs that have more permanent water bodies like lakes and ponds, but they're out and about on rainy nights in the late spring and summer. They're very similar in appearance. They're both greenish in color, sometimes with some brown in there. And those are the green frog and the bullfrog. Bullfrogs grow to an enormous size. So if you find a 5-pound frog, it is a bullfrog. There is no other frog species in New England that grows to that size. But if you find a smaller green colored frog and you're trying to decide if it's a green frog or a bullfrog, the thing that I always look for is on their backs. The green frog has what are called dorsolateral ridges, these ridges running down their back. Bullfrogs do not have that, even as small critters. So that's what I always look for. There's other ways you can try to tell them apart, but for me, the most easiest way is to look at the back and look for the ridge. We have one more to talk about. This one gets its own slide, a class all its own. My favorite, the American toad. I'm sure you've seen them in gardens. They do migrate later in April and May in our neck of the woods. They have really incredible short-lived breeding choruses where they are wailing in shallow wetlands and shallow areas of ponds. They are pretty warty. They're brown to orange in color. They're grumpy looking most of the time, so that's a way to tell them. And they also have kind of a stout and upright appearance to them. Some commonly confused species that might look like each other at first glance, but when you look a little closer, so both gray tree frogs and American toads have that kind of bumpy looking skin, but they both have a wide range of sizes from like 1-inch juveniles up to really large adults. But there are some pretty distinctive differences. So one is color. So gray tree frogs are more grayish or green, whereas toads are brownish or orange. They also have a different stature. So toads are more upright and kind of stout looking, and they hop. They live on the forest floor and they hop around. So if you look at their toes, you can see that those are the legs and toes of a hopping animal, pointed toes. Gray tree frogs, as we've said, live mostly in trees. So they have a kind of they hug the ground a little closer when they're on the ground, but they also have those toe pads. So if you're not sure, you can always look at the feet.
Quick question, which I
Yes.
think you might have just answered this, but Olivia, who's 6 years old, is wondering, do frogs hop and toads walk? Is that true?
That's a really great question. Toads can walk, but they also can hop. I don't see too many frogs walking, although it happens from time to time. So I think that they both can do both. Toads probably walk more often than frogs do. And it all depends on the species too. Gray tree frogs and spring peepers, there are 2 tree frog species here in New Hampshire, so they both have the suction cup toes. But when you look at their skin, you can see they're quite different, because the gray tree frog, again, has that really bumpy bark-like texture, and peepers have smooth skin and also tend to be more tan or yellowish or brown in color. So even if they're the same size, the gray tree frog will have that more bumpy texture to its skin. And then generally speaking, if you see a very tiny frog on an early spring night on the road, it's probably a peeper. But occasionally we get juvenile wood frogs that are the same size as peepers. And so if you see a frog that looks a little different, take a look for that black eye mass, that the band behind the eye of the dark brown or black. Wood frogs have that even when they're very small, and peepers do not. So that's a way to tell a frog from a peeper, or a wood frog from a spring peeper. And after all of that, what if you still can't tell what species it is? This is a picture from Forest Lake Road in Winchester a number of years ago. It's a really strange looking salamander. It doesn't really have spots, does it? So they did what I would recommend you do. Well, there's 2 things. One is, if you're at a site where there's a volunteer called a site coordinator, they will have a vest on that says Harris Center on the back. They can help with species ID, because they're volunteers who've taken some time to really get to know the different species. If there is no site coordinator, if they don't know, take a picture, send it to me, and we'll talk about it, which is exactly what Deb did down in Winchester. And I sent this around to a bunch of herpetologist friends, and we hemmed and hawed about it for a while. And in the end, they decided it was a spotted salamander with really weird spots. But we always love those kinds of questions. Okay, so that's the species ID part of the night. I am going to do some pop quizzes on the polls to help see if you remember species ID. But now we're going to kind of move into what I always call the so what slide. So my hope is that you're going to leave tonight not only maybe wanting to be a Salamander Crossing Brigade volunteer, but also being an advocate for amphibians and understanding their importance in the world. So I always like to talk about, why do they matter? And there's a number of things to talk about here. And the first is just why do they matter ecologically to our ecosystems? And one way of looking at this is a concept called biomass, which at its simplest form is a calculation that scientists can make to compare different groups of things. So at its most basic form, if I wanted to calculate the biomass of humans in the building I'm in now, I'd add my mass and Karen's mass and the mass of anyone who's walking by my door. I'd add them all together and I'd get a number. And maybe I want to compare that to the biomass of mice in this building. So mice are much smaller, but tend to be much more numerous. So when I compared those 2 figures, the number might surprise us. If there's a lot of mice, maybe there's a greater biomass of mice in this building than of humans after all. And so that's a way of looking at ecosystems. How is energy moving through ecosystems in the bodies of animals? And there was a really groundbreaking study from the 70s in Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire that found that the biomass of redback salamanders alone, just that species, was greater than that of all the breeding birds combined. All of them combined. And new research is actually finding that was an underestimate for redback salamanders, that there may be more than that. Another study in Massachusetts looked at vernal pool breeding amphibians, which wood frogs, Jefferson salamanders, and spotted salamanders in this case, and found that the biomass of vernal pool breeding amphibians was greater than that of all breeding birds and small mammals combined in the 50 acres surrounding that one vernal pool. So what does that mean? It means that there's an incredible amount of energy moving through our forests in the bodies of these animals. And that really manifests itself in the food web. They are important prey for everything: herons and owls and foxes and coyotes and turkeys, you name it. Even as eggs, I said that, that vernal pools don't have a lot of predators, but they don't have no predators. And so for some turtle species, for instance, happening upon these eggs is a spring miracle for them. Because if you think about what our woods look like right now, think about how hungry these animals are after a long winter, and think about what kind of food is available in the woods in early spring. There's not much, right? We don't have any flying insects yet. We have no buds. We have, the nuts are probably already eaten, no fruits, no flowers. But if you're a Blandings turtle and you stumble upon a vernal pool with these nuggets of protein floating in it, it's a great spot for you. And barred owls too, they love to hunt in vernal pools and to pull spotted salamanders and wood frogs out of those pools with their talons and eat them. So I love this fast food oases metaphor because they're really important places. And the amphibians are at the heart of that. As we were talking a little bit about this, it's not uncommon for a small vernal pool to produce 10,000 froglets. 10 of those will make it to adulthood. The rest are food. So Miles, I do have a poll for this one. I think it's poll number 2. Here we go. I'm going to launch it. I think I can do it. So this is your first test. What species are we looking at here? It's on a fingertip. If that scale means anything to you and gives you any sense for anything. All right. Give you a few more seconds here to wager your vote. I'm impressed by what I'm seeing so far because you guys are paying good attention. I thought this would be trickier than it was. I'll give a few more seconds for stragglers here. All right, I'm going to end polling and share the results. So you guys are right. It's a wood frog, even though it's teeny tiny like a peeper might be. I thought that might be a trick, but you can see that it has that really clear dark bandit's mask, and that is a juvenile wood frog. So great job. All right, moving on. So not only are they important prey, but they're also really important predators. They eat an incredible amount and diversity of invertebrates. This is an American toad, a sequence of a toad eating a wasp that my friend Dave photographed. I've read some statistics about toads that they can eat during the growing season 3 times their weight in bugs every day, up to 10,000 invertebrates in a single growing season for a single toad. There was also a study that looked at vernal pools and found that vernal pools that had spotted salamanders in them not only had fewer mosquito larvae because they were eating the mosquito larvae, but the mosquitoes, who also want a safe place for their young to grow up, were preferentially choosing to lay eggs in vernal pools that had fewer spotted salamander larvae in them because they knew they'd be safer. So vernal pools are still inherently mosquito-y and buggy places, but less so if you've got spotted salamanders there. There's also some interesting research being done about their role in carbon sequestration. So New York Times a few years ago ran a story calling salamanders the climate change heroes of the forest. The research they were reporting on is looking at this relationship where you've got invertebrates that are collectively known as shredders. They eat leaf litter on the forest floor by shredding it up. And when that happens, a little bit of carbon gets released into the atmosphere. And if you don't have that many shredders, those leaves get buried kind of like a wet blanket, and that carbon gets more slowly absorbed into the soil instead of being released into the atmosphere. And so these scientists in a number of places looked at studies where when you had salamanders that were eating shredders, you had more carbon getting stored in the soil instead of being released into the atmosphere. And they quantified that and they put a number on it. I have a little question mark here because I think there's still more research that needs to be done before this is accepted as you know, in more places and to understand this dynamic, but it's a really intriguing idea. The flip side of this is not only they're important, but they're also threatened. They're very sensitive species. So as we talked about, when handling them, they can absorb toxins through their skin. So they're very sensitive to pollutants as well as disease and habitat loss. This is an old map now. It's actually being in the process of being updated in 2021 and 2022. But this is a map that shows the number of salamander species that are threatened, endangered, or presumed extinct in the world. So more than half of all salamander species worldwide are threatened or presumed extinct. So there are places here where there are more species threatened or presumed extinct than we have in the entirety of New England. Those orange and yellow and red figures. But if you look up by us, we're very fortunate. We don't have a whole lot of rare species yet. We have an opportunity to keep our common species common. So that brings us to roadkill. When I ask people what's the first animal that comes to mind when they think of roadkill, you know, throw a few ideas in the chat. I usually hear squirrel. I usually hear deer, porcupine. I don't ever hear amphibian. But when you look at the studies, really reptiles and amphibians are the ones who are suffering the greatest consequences from roadkill. It's just that we don't see it as much because it's happening on rainy nights when we're not driving. And in the morning, their carcasses are largely gone. They're either scavenged or they're pulverized beyond recognition. But there's been some studies that have looked at this and they're really jaw-dropping. So in Canada, there was a study that looked at a 2-mile stretch of a 2-lane road over 4 seasons and counted 32,000 dead amphibians. In New York, they looked at salamanders trying to cross a paved rural road, like roads most of us drive every day, and found that their best case scenario there was that 1 out of every 2 made it across. And another study in Massachusetts looked specifically at spotted salamanders and found that at even lower rates of roadkill, they might lose their local spotted salamander populations in as few as 25 years. So it's not something we see, but it's something that's happening. And location is really important here. Roads near water are where this is happening the most for salamanders, for frogs, and for turtles and snakes. Especially causeways, which is a road that has water on both sides. This is a causeway area in the town where I live. So they have 4 times more amphibian roadkill and 9 times more reptile roadkill than roads that are not near water. Traffic volume also comes into play. So really, really busy highways probably lost their amphibian populations a long time ago. And really poorly traveled dirt roads probably don't have a whole lot to worry about, but it's these middle of the road kind of roads, these paved rural roads where even small number of vehicles a day can make a big difference for amphibians. So 30% mortality at just 240 vehicles a day from one study. That's the depressing part. So here's the hopeful part. There are solutions. There are ways to fix this. Amphibian tunnels are one of them. These are pictures from the amphibian tunnels down in Amherst, Massachusetts. These are world famous in herpetological circles because they were the first tunnels to go in solely for migrating amphibians. You can see spotted salamanders and wood frogs making their way through. Volunteers help clean them out every year. Go out, they're probably out there tonight watching critters come through those tunnels because it's a little warmer down there. This is what doesn't look like a very exciting picture, but it's a very exciting picture. So this is a picture from Moncton, Vermont, where people worked together for 10 years to raise the funding to put in 2 tunnels under a road. And this is the very first spotted salamander documented moving through one of those tunnels through a trail cam. And in the first season alone, they documented 2,400 salamanders and frogs moving through these tunnels. So they work. The downside to these is they're quite expensive. So this Moncton project cost about $400,000, and not every town can do that.
How do they find the tunnels?
That's an awesome question, Miles. So they don't just find them on their own. Well, for one thing, you're siting the tunnels at places where there is already a lot of amphibian roadkill. So you're putting them in places where amphibians are trying to cross the road already. So they're already there, but to help them find the tunnels, they need fencing that guides them through. It doesn't need to be very tall fencing because these are small animals, but they need to, so they basically hit the fence, walk along it until they get to the tunnel. And that's an equally important part of a tunnel project is the fencing. There are also communities that are starting to look at closing roads on migration nights. This is far less expensive than putting in tunnels. It's not as effective because you can't close the road every time a salamander might cross it. Like the tunnel can accommodate any salamander who wants to cross that road at any time. The road closures are designed to capture the moments when the most number of amphibians are across the road, but they're virtually free. So it's it's an option for towns, and including Keene, New Hampshire, where many of us are from, which has been doing this with our help for the last few years, which I'll talk about in a moment. But none of these efforts can happen unless we know where these migrations are taking place and have data to support that it's makes sense to put in a tunnel or to do a road closure, that there are enough amphibians or that there are rare amphibians that would justify these projects and help to prioritize where they should take place. So all of these projects, these tunnel projects, these road closures started with people going out on rainy nights and looking for critters and documenting what they found. And that's what we do with the Salamander Brigades. So now we're going to kind of transition into talking about how the Salamander Brigades work. And some of this will be a little different if those of you who end up volunteering with North Branch Nature Center or kind of going out on your own, but a lot of it will apply, especially the safety pieces about being out on the road. So Salamander Brigades, what do they do? What is this all about? There's kind of two components. There's before the big nights, there's on the big nights. Before the big nights, the first thing you do is attend a training. Congratulations, you're already there. You have done this part or close to it. The second thing you do is you're staying on call. So as we've discussed, like I can't tell you what night the migration will happen. I can only tell you what to look for. There's a few parts of staying on call. Like how do I find out when big night will happen? So first is if you wish to, anyone who's here tonight, you'll automatically be added to our big Salamander Brigade email list. And I will send out emails when migrations seem likely for Southwest New Hampshire. We also this year are experimenting with new separate email lists, site specific. So if you know that you live in Keene and you want to go out on Jordan Road, we have a separate sign up sheet for you to say, I want to be part of the Jordan Road email list. And then everybody who wants to go out to Jordan Road can kind of talk amongst themselves and figure out a plan. So that way people don't have to be on the road alone, but also in the era of COVID, if there's too many people who want to go to a spot, you can make a decision and say, there's a lot of people going out there tonight. I'm going to go somewhere else. So those are totally optional, but if you're local, we encourage you to sign up for these site-specific lists so that you can kind of help coordinate before you go out. We also have a 5-day salamander forecast on our website. It is active now. It changes every day during the season, and we've got color-coded and a narrative explanation underneath it. So if you're not sure, I try not to overwhelm people with email on the big email list, and I'll really only send them out at the most likely times. So if you're wondering, the salamander forecast gets updated almost daily. So if you're like, I haven't heard from Brett, I wonder if there's going to be a migration, check out this forecast. Again, this is particular to Southwest New Hampshire. The conditions here may be very different from the seacoast or Northern New Hampshire or Rhode Island. And then the last thing, this is so funny. I can't see what my last thing says because my Zoom thing is blocking it. Shoot, Miles, can you read the bottom there? I can't remember what my third part was. Watch the weather. Yes, you can watch the weather on your own wherever you live and look for 40-degree plus rains at night. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so you're staying on call. You're also getting all your gear together so that you're ready when the night comes. Like Karen right now is sitting in there with her reflective vest. She is ready. So I'm going to talk about what does that mean? What do you need to have on the ready? Most important thing by far is a reflective vest. This is a safety issue. Do not go out. Wherever you are, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, do not go out on the road at night without a reflective vest. You need to be visible to cars. You can get them at hardware stores, sporting goods stores, on the internet. They are widely available. If you are local and cost is a barrier, the Harris Center may have vests that we can loan you. You can just drop me a line. But this is super important. Don't go out without it. In this day and age, you also can't go out without your face mask, even outside, especially at sites where there might be multiple volunteers. Rain gear. It will be raining. It will be wet. That is part of this whole thing. So you need to kind of prepare yourself for being out there. And we always say these are the first warm, rainy nights of spring, but warm to a wood frog who can literally freeze solid and survive is not the same thing as warm to a human being. 42 degrees does not feel warm. So you want to be really layered up and ready for some time on the road. Bright lights, flashlights, headlamps, cell phone. I want to say this like 5 times. Cell phone flashlights are not enough. They are not bright enough. You need a real flashlight or headlamp or both. Headlamps are great for seeing your data forms and for being visible from a distance, but nothing beats a handheld flashlight for looking for critters on the road because you can direct the beam and focus it in a way that you can't do with headlamps. And you also do not want to grab the flashlight out of your junk drawer that's been sitting there for a year unused and expect that the batteries are going to be good enough for big night. You want to put fresh batteries in, you want to charge everything up and really have bright lights. This is not just so you can see the amphibians, it's also a safety issue so that cars can see you. Some people at our really busy sites, rather than carrying animals across one at a time, like to bring out a bucket, put a whole bunch of frogs in that bucket, walk across and gently release them on the other side of the road. I find that it's one more thing to carry and I don't like to carry it, but some people do. And if you do carry a bucket, it needs to be clean of no bleach, nothing out of, you didn't want to just grab the bucket out of your hall closet that you use with all these kind of chemicals to clean things in your house. It has to be washed with soap and water and clean. Some people also like to bring, I don't bring this myself, but so we count live animals. If you choose to count dead, we also count dead animals because that gives us a sense for what's happening on the roads. And if you're out there long enough, you're going to see some dead frogs and salamanders. I am sorry to say, it's like the worst part of this. So if you count them on your data forms, we ask that you remove them from the road so that we don't have 5 people walking past the same dead wood frog and think that we have 5 dead wood frogs. If you want to remove them from the road, you can pick them up and simply place them off the road. Some people don't like to touch them, so they bring a tool like a spatula to kind of flick the dead ones away. Data forms and a pencil. Some of our sites have kind of super volunteers called site coordinators who will be out there and have data forms that they can hand out to you on Write in the Rain paper. Some of our sites don't have site coordinators, and if you're not in our region, you can't really guarantee that anyone else will be out there with you. So you want to bring your own data forms. It's something to lean on. Our data forms are printed on Write in the Rain paper, which has a coating on it that prevents it from falling apart when it gets wet, which is awesome, but you can't write on it with a pen, only a pencil. And even on regular data forms, pencils will be better. Something to lean on. It's good to go in teams so that you have one person maybe doing the data recording and one person moving the animals. So maybe you only need one of these things for both of you. And then of course you want something to take pictures because these animals are ridiculously adorable and endearing, and you will want to share them with people. If you share them with us, we have a form on our website where you can submit images. We will share them with the whole salamander community with photo credit to you. So we love to get pictures of amphibians and encourage you to share them with us. So that's before the big night. You've got all your stuff. Like I have all my stuff in a bag in my office right now, ready to go out tonight if it's still raining and warm when we're done here. On the big nights, you're going out to a site. We're going to talk about how to know where to go in a minute. And it's quite simple. You're moving these animals across the road by hand in the direction that they're going. They know where they're going. In the beginning of the season, they'll all be moving one direction. In the middle of the season, some will be leaving the wetland and some will still be coming in. And at the end of the season, more of them will be leaving. But you're moving them in the direction they're headed. You're keeping count by species. Oh gosh, I can't see my third. This is like the Zoom format. I can't see the bottom one. Miles, what's the one under keep count?
Keep count, report your data.
Report your data. Thank you. You'd think I've given this talk like 50 times. You'd think I'd remember every single part. Yeah, so at the end of the night, if there's a site coordinator, you're going to hand them your data forms or just verbally say to them, okay, I crossed 25 wood frogs, 37 peepers, and 4 spotted salamanders, and then they'll report it to me. But if there's no site coordinator, at the end of the night, you go to harriscenter.org and you find the form and you send your data in. And that's how if you don't send your data in at the end of the night, we'll never know what happened out there. That's the only way we know, and it's the only way we can share it with other people. And so after every big night, we compile a field report that happened at all the different sites that got reported to us, and we share it with everyone. So you can kind of see, oh, Glebe Road had all these spotties last night, and North Lincoln only had wood frogs or what have you, and you can get a sense for numbers and also get a sense for the bigger effort that you're part of. Because when you're out there with just one or two other people, sometimes you feel kind of alone out there. But then when you get back in, you share your data and you see everyone else's, you realize you're part of a movement. There are hundreds of us doing this. But by far the most important thing that you are going to be doing out there is keeping yourself safe. It is the most important thing. And this is the most important slides of this entire talk. So pay close attention. Your safety is your primary responsibility. It will be dark and wet and possibly foggy. Driving visibility will be dramatically reduced and drivers may not expect to see you on the road. Some of our sites that have site coordinators may have Salamander Crossing signs up to alert drivers, but you may not be at a site with a site coordinator. And even when you do, sometimes drivers don't pay attention to those signs or see them. You need to be responsible for your safety. First and foremost, wear a reflective vest. I'm going to tell you like 5 more times because it is so important. And every year people come out without reflective vests on. Safety is tied to visibility. Cars need to be able to see you. Here is proof. These are some interns from a few years back who were out doing salamander crossings on a road that did not have streetlights. Could you see them if they were not wearing a reflective vest? No, you could not see them. Okay, you're wearing a vest. You're shining your bright light. We've already talked about the importance of fresh batteries and not relying on a cell phone flashlight, an actual flashlight or headlamp. You're staying alert. You're looking and listening for cars all the time. And when you hear a car, if there are other volunteers on the road who do not hear the car, you're going to call out car, just like your kid playing ball in the street, so that everybody is part of the community of keeping each other safe. And as soon as you see a car come into view, you are stepping off the road. You are stepping aside. So we used to call our volunteers Salamander Crossing Guards. And now we call ourselves Salamander Crossing Brigades. And the reason that we've changed that is because Salamander Crossing Guards stop traffic. We do not stop traffic. Our goal is to move amphibians across the road faster than they can move themselves. It is not safe to stop traffic. It is not legal to stop traffic. So under no circumstances should you attempt to slow or stop cars. You also should not shine your flashlights at cars. Even if you're really mad because you know they saw you and they didn't slow down and you think they should have slowed down. If you shine your light at a car, you run the risk of shining it in the driver's face, which is an unsafe situation for everyone. You just gotta, what I do when a car's passing by, I step off the road and I shine my flashlight at myself so that it shines off my reflective vest and the cars can see me all the better. This last one sounds obvious, but I'm gonna play a scenario for you in which it's not so clear cut. So don't risk your life for amphibians. So if you do this, eventually there's gonna come a time when you are out on a road and you hear a car coming and you're stepping aside. And as the car is coming through, you're gonna look in the headlights of that car because those are more powerful than any flashlight you'll ever have. And it'll help you see the road better and what's in the road. And you'll see a spotted salamander or a wood frog in the road in front of the car. And your very first thought will be, because you're a caring person who loves these animals, your very first thought will be, I'm gonna run out there just real quick and grab it before the car comes. So what I want your second thought to be is my voice in your head saying, don't do it. Don't do it. These roads are wet and slick. You could very easily slip if you're rushing. These animals, particularly on warm nights, can be squirmy and can squirm out of your hands. And that puts everybody in danger. The worst part of this is having to step aside while a car goes by and you know that there's an amphibian out there. But you just have to step aside, hope for the best, and when the car passes, go out and tend to that animal. Families, I know we've got some young folks on the call. There's a few extra precautions that you should take. One is to leave the very youngest children at home. We generally say that crossing brigades are for elementary school aged and up. So kids who can be safe around traffic and who you can trust not to dart into the road if they see a salamander and get super excited about it. Family-friendly crossing. So what does that mean? Wide shoulders, sidewalks, slower moving traffic, maybe streetlights that have better visibility. So if you're in our region, we have a map of crossing sites on our website, and some of them are flagged as being very family friendly, and some of them are flagged as being not family friendly at all. So you can go and check that out. If you're from another spot, or even if you're not, I would encourage you to go out in the daylight and check, get the lay of the land and get a sense for, is this a safe place? Does this feel safe to me? Everyone in your group should be wearing a reflective vest, not just one child, not just one parent. Everybody needs to be visible. And then we really recommend a 1-to-1 ratio of adults to children. And that's because it can be really hard to wrangle a group of excited kids if you're just one adult. Everyone's going to be excited seeing frogs and salamanders. And what we recommend is one adult, one child, and the adult's primary responsibility is the safety of that child. And so if you are one parent with 3 or 4 kids, get family, friends to help out there on big night with you. It's more fun that way anyway, but it's really helpful for safety. We also, of course, are living in the COVID era, right? So we have to think about that kind of safety as well. So if you have been exposed to someone recently who tested positive, or you are experiencing symptoms, do not come out for an amphibian crossing. You should bring a mask, and you should wear it over your mouth and nose whenever you are around anyone who's not from your own household. So any of these sites that have groups of people coming together. Of course, you're keeping your distance from other people. This sadly means no gathering together clustered around a salamander to get a good look. And I would recommend if you get to a site and you see a ton of people there, that to the point where really more than 10 people, or if it's a really wide spaced out site, so many people that you can't maintain physical distancing, go home or go somewhere else. Just for this year, it's important that we can keep each other safe by spacing out. And then I already mentioned this, but we've gotten in the habit of using hand sanitizer everywhere we go, every day, all the time. Hand sanitizer can be harmful to amphibians. So if you are planning to handle amphibians, do not use hand sanitizer. Instead, we recommend washing your hands with soap and water before you go in the field, and as soon as you get home, trying not to touch your face. You can also use nitrile non-powdered disposable gloves. Some of our site coordinators will have them. You can bring your own if that's more comfortable for you. But hand sanitizer is no good for critters. I think I had a poll. Did I? All right, I'm going to do another poll for this guy. Okay, what species are we looking at here on the COVID page? Oh my gosh. You guys are paying good attention.
While people are answering the poll, there was
Yeah.
a question about injured animals. What do you do?
Oh, that's a tough question. That's a good question. It's a tough question. So this is a tough question to answer. It happens. You will see injured animals out there. Amphibians are quite resilient. So if it's only an injury to a leg or a tail, we move them across, we count them among the living, and we wish them the best, and they can recover from that. If it's an injury to the core body or the head that is serious, we count them among the dead because they won't survive that. And we move them off the road generally if you can bear it. If you can't handle it, you don't have to deal with it. You can leave it there and someone else will handle it. All right, so you guys all know that this is in fact a pickerel frog. I should have put leopard frog in there to try to trick you better, but yes, pickerel frog with those rectangular spots. Okay. This is Andrew. I love this. This is an old picture now, but he's like, looks exactly how you should look for big night, except this is pre-COVID, so he doesn't have a face mask. But I always like to point out the features because this is how you should look. So first and foremost, he is wearing a reflective vest. I want to say this again, because I don't know if I've mentioned it enough times yet, but you should not go out on big night without a reflective vest. He's got 2 sources of light. He's got his headlamp and his flashlight. He wears glasses like I do, so he knows that if he wants to be able to see and to stay alert to traffic, he needs to wear a brimmed cap to keep the water off of his glasses. He's got his pencil clipped right here. He's ready to collect data. his rain jacket. He's got a little peeper in his hand. And equally as important as his reflective vest, he is smiling. He's having fun. He's having a good time out there. If you've reached a point in the night where you are cold and tired and you're not smiling anymore, it's time to go home. It's okay to leave. So this is a low commitment volunteer opportunity in which we ask people to come if they can and to stay as long as you like. If you're there for half an hour, wonderful. If you're there for 4 hours, that's great too. If conditions are right, amphibians will migrate all night long. We're not expecting anyone to be out there at 2 or 3 a.m. to collect data on amphibians. We're basically doing the best we can with the time that we're awake. And the reality is that in terms of road mortality, the hours between sunset and 10 or 11 are the most important. So you might be super into herps and you might want to drink a bunch of coffee and stay up till dawn checking out the roads, and that's cool. People do that every year and we strongly encourage that if you like that, but you can also go out from 8 to 8:30 p.m. and feel good about what you did. So we've already kind of talked about some of these questions. Did I have a poll for this one too? I think I did. Let me see here. Okay, I do have a poll. So I'm going to launch polling. Miles, is there any other questions to answer while people are identifying the species?
Well, I'm wondering about just not driving on nights like this. Are there,
100% that the very best thing that you can do for amphibians is to not drive on rainy spring and summer nights. The best thing that you can do for them is to not drive anywhere, for sure. The next best thing, is to drive in to a place to help them, but you want to drive slowly near all bodies of water. You want to leave extra time in case you need to stop for critters. And if you can walk to a site, if you live in Keene and can walk to North Lincoln Street or Jordan Road instead of driving, that's all the better. But if you do this and you're like, you know what, I don't want to be cold and wet. I don't want to go out on a 43-degree night and be soaking wet for 2 hours. That's not fun for me. You can still feel good about what you're doing for amphibians by not going anywhere. So if you had an errand to run or something that you thought you might do that night and you can push it off till the next day, you will save the lives of dozens or more of amphibians simply by not driving, because we all hit them and we don't even know it. I know I do it too. I've been doing this for 15 years and I know every year that I have hit amphibians driving on rainy nights. So if you can not drive, that's awesome. All right, I'm ending polling. You guys are on it. Jefferson Complex salamander. So yes, we've got, let me get this out of the way here. We've got that kind of grayish body, no spots. This is a site, this is from our Jordan Road site. You can see this is kind of a big one. So we've already kind of talked about handling amphibians, but just as a reminder, make sure your hands are clean, wet, and free of toxins, like no lotions, no hand sanitizer. I usually get there and I stick my hands in a puddle. It's just the same water that the critters are in. And this year I'll be washing my hands with soap and water before I head out as well. You want to keep a gentle kind of firm hold around the center of their bodies when you're handling them. Do not pick them up by their legs or their tails. This can hurt them. You really want to keep in the center of their bodies. And I can't believe I have to tell you this, but a few years ago, one of our volunteers thought that if he gave them a little bit of like tough love, maybe they wouldn't come back to the roadside. So he was tossing them off the road. Don't do that. Just release them gently. You're going to release them gently on the side of the road. In general, you want to stay on the pavement if you can for your own safety, because they're harder to see on the unpaved road shoulders and you might step on them by accident. So you're kind of walking them to the edge of the pavement and releasing them gently and letting them go. This reminds me, there was a question that came in ahead of time about light pollution and how it affects amphibians. I don't know the full answer to that. I think it does affect them. I have definitely observed that when we spent a lot of time looking closely at a salamander with our headlamps on to take pictures, that sometimes they can get kind of confused and befuddled and need some time in a dark place to readjust themselves. So you probably want to minimize the amount of time you're looking closely at an animal in the light. There was also a question that same person asked about road salt and whether that was a concern. These nights are pretty wet, so there's not a lot of residual salt on the roads that, to harm the bodies of the animals themselves. It is definitely a concern for roadside vernal pools and the development of embryos and eggs that excess salt can be harmful in that regard, but not such a big concern on the big nights themselves. So I kind of have already told you a bit about what to expect. There is a video that is on our website from New Jersey that I think is a really great glimpse at Big Night. I'm not going to show it to you now, but it's going to be part of your homework to watch it. It's like 5 minutes long, and it shows you kind of, you know, some nights you are out there and there are literally hundreds of frogs on the road within view of you. Many nights there's one critter here, one critter there, and it's a lot slower than that. It all depends on the site and the weather. But in terms of what to expect, a little bit depends on whether you're coming out as part of our crossing program in the Monadnock region to a site where we have a site coordinator, or whether you're going out on your own. Either way, you're kind of doing all this prep work and preparing. If you get to a site that has a site coordinator, you'll know because you'll see someone with a reflective vest that says Harris Center on the back, or there'll be a Salamander Crossing sign there. When you arrive at one of those sites, those are kind of what we call our established sites. We have information about parking and what to expect when you get there on our website. These are sites we've been going to for many years, and we often will have a go-to person, an Uber volunteer who's out there helping to coordinate the efforts. And when you're at one of those sites, we ask that you check in with that person. They can give you a data form and kind of help orient you to the site. If there is no site coordinator, or you're at a different site, or you're out on your own, you just kind of show up and get yourself ready to go. And then you're going to basically be walking back and forth down the road or down a section of the road. I recommend walking facing traffic so that you can see cars that are coming towards you. You're walking slowly and you're scanning the road with your flashlight, looking for rocks with one end tipped up. Those are frogs, or sticks that have one end tipped up, and those are salamanders. And when you see one, you're gonna go to it, you're gonna move it across the road, and you're gonna note it on your data sheet. And if it's dead, if you choose to remove it from the road, you can note it on your data sheet too. And you're kind of going back and forth doing that throughout the night until it's time to leave. And if there's a site coordinator, you can give them your counts. You can either tell them, okay, I got 27 spring peepers and 4 spotted salamanders and 1 red-backed, or if you want to keep your data form, or you can just hand them your data form. If you don't have a site coordinator, you're going to come back and enter that information on our website so that we have it. We already talked about this, so sharing your data. This is a great example of a young wood frog, incidentally, the same size as a spring peeper, but you can see the bandit's mask to differentiate it, and you can also see the toe pads on the peeper. And here's a tally sheet, tick marks 1, 2, 3, 4 with the 5th one to help keep count. I mentioned site coordinators. I just want to give a shout out to Sarah if she's still here, and to Karen Seaver. We do still need some site coordinators, especially in Winchester and Swansea. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, the hardest thing that they do is they stick around for the whole season. And if there's a migration, they go out. So that in and of itself can be challenging because we can't predict when they'll happen very far in advance, but they agree to to be there, familiarize themselves with the crossing site, where to park, can answer questions about it, keep track of traffic cones and signs and data forms. They help orient volunteers to the site, occasionally share information with passersby, help identify amphibian species, and then kind of get all the data from that site into us in a timely fashion so we can share it with everyone. So if this is interesting to you, and you can drop me a line afterwards, and I'd be happy, especially if you live in Winchester or Swansea. So this, I want to stop share screen here because I want to talk a bit about crossing sites and give you a brief tour at the website on how to find the information that you need. So I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to share. Oh gosh, we're almost 8:30 and I still have more to say. I'm really sorry, you guys. I'll try to go fast. There's always so much. So I just want to show you, can you see the Harris Center website? Yeah. So here's how to find the information you need. Salamander Crossing Brigades. We've got crossing sites. This is where you can go to find what is the site nearest you. When you click on this map, it'll open an interactive map. You can click on any one of those buttons and it will tell you information about that particular site. Salamander forecast, super important. Here's today's forecast, and here's all the, you really want to get into the nitty-gritty details about why we're saying what we're saying, it's here. But you can also just look at the color code. We also have volunteer materials. This is where you will find the volunteer handbook, data forms, liability waivers and such, and where you submit your data. And then once we get going, we're going to have field reports from each of the big nights so that you can see what happened out there with everybody else, including your pictures that you choose to share with us. So, and then if anyone, and we also, if you know people in other places, we keep a list of other crossing brigade programs in other states. So if you are not in Southwest New Hampshire, there may be another crossing program close to you. So I'm going to go back to this. So that's our crossing sites. If you don't have any crossings near you, it's time to do a survey in your town, a road survey. So you're going to do the same thing that we're all doing. You're watching the weather, you're looking at the clock, going out after dark. You're going to look at sites where there is water near the road, especially sites that have a forested hillside on one side and water on the other. Those are prime locations for amphibian crossings. So that you pick a few ahead of time that you think you might go to on a big night. Bring a friend if you can, or a family member, because one of you should be driving while the other is really looking for amphibians. And you are going to be driving very slowly, especially near water, 15 miles an hour or less, or you won't see the critters on the road. Roll your windows down. Don't listen to the radio or podcast. Listen for wood frogs instead. Scan the whole road. What you're looking for is not just live animals, but dead animals, because sometimes they'd stick around longer. So sometimes that's a sign that you've got a good crossing site, is a bunch of dead critters on the road, I'm sorry to say. If you find a spot and you're geared up with your vest and your rain gear, you know, find a safe place to park and get out of the car for half an hour and do some walking back and forth and see if there's a lot of animals there. We've got these data forms on our website. You can give detailed driving directions, and then you're kind of keeping count. What did you find out there? And sending it to us, and we'll add it to our map. If you're at one of our known crossing sites, there's another project that I'm going to just tell you about super quickly that is really fun. And this is a project where we're looking at the spot patterns of spotted salamanders, because they're kind of like fingerprints. Each individual salamander has its own unique pattern. And if you take pictures of it, you can tell whether you're seeing the same salamander again year after year. And if you don't believe me, here's an example of a salamander that we saw on both its inbound and outbound migration the first year we started taking pictures. So you can see, for instance, those two spots equally spaced. This one, they're kind of connected. There it is again. 3 around the base of the head. Here's another one. These two are connected. There it is. Kind of got 6 up there on the head. Everyone is different the more you look at it. So we've had more than 30 salamanders that we've encountered on 2 occasions or more in Keene. We've got 24 individual ones that have been counted in multiple years. This guy or gal came, we saw them 5 years in a row, which was pretty amazing. So if you want to participate in this, just a few things to note. Spotted salamanders only. Other salamanders don't have this same unique patterning. We really, right now, are focusing on our most well-established crossings where we know we're going to have data from year to year. So for us, that's Jordan Road in Keene, North Lincoln Street in Keene, the 2 Swansea crossings, and Nelson Road in Nelson. You can do this on your own at home for your local crossing site, but these are the ones where we're really soliciting data from for long-term records. We really want to see the head and back from above. So a picture like this does not help us because we can't see the spots. Picture like that doesn't help us too much either because we can only see some of the spots. That is what you want to go for. I'm going to try to rush through this a little bit because we're running out of time. So we also need to know when you took the picture, where you took the picture. If you're super savvy about renaming file names, you can also include a unique number for each of the salamanders that you found that night and send us a file that is called something like this. That saves us time on the data management end. If this sounds like gibberish to you and you don't know what I'm talking about, you can ignore that and send us just the picture, but we do need the date and the site in order to make use of it. Real quick, every year people ask me, how are the salamanders doing? How does this site compare to that site? How does this year compare to this other year? And I can't really answer that. If I wanted to answer that, I would do what we're doing in this picture. So the reason I can't answer that is because every year is different and every site is different. So some years we might have 2 people at a site, and other years we might have 50. And even if we had the exact same number of salamanders, 50 people would probably encounter a higher percentage of those salamanders than 2 people would. And some years the rain comes at 3 a.m. and nobody's out to see it, and we don't have any counts, but it doesn't mean there were no salamanders. It just means we didn't record them. If we really wanted to record them, we would do what's happening here, which is to set up what's called a pitfall array, which is fencing with these little traps dug into the ground so that when a salamander tries to get where it's going, it hits the fence, it can't get where it's going, it walks along the fence until it falls into one of these traps. And then highly caffeinated graduate students stay up all night and they remove these animals from the traps and they keep count and they collect some data. And then you can really say, we know all the animals that went into this particular wetland. And then you can do that year after year and you can say, we have a sense for how many animals are here and how they're doing year to year. That is very labor intensive. It is expensive, and we don't do that kind of science. It's just not possible for us, really. But I do really want to convey to you that the counts that we're taking, it's not nothing. And here's an example of that. In 2008, this is our North Lincoln Street site. Karen probably doesn't even recognize it because it's all grown in with knotweed now, but this is what it looked like in 2008. There used to be woods there. And then one day the woods were gone and this for sale sign came up, and the Keene Conservation Commission had before them a proposal to put several houses on this site. And this is right near our crossing. And they contacted me and they said, we heard you did something with amphibians. How does this site compare to all your other sites? Is this an important site? And I said, well, I can't tell you how it compares to other sites. I can't really give that to you. But what I can tell you is that in 4 hours the other night, 20 volunteers moved 838 frogs across the road, and they all were going onto that property. So in that case, the numbers tell a story that words can't tell. The numbers make a difference. And if we didn't have those numbers, if I had just said, oh yeah, there's a lot of frogs there. Well, what's a lot? Is it 10? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? So the numbers matter. And in this case, this site is even more exciting. In recent years, we've worked with the city of Keene now to close this site to vehicle traffic on migration nights to keep it a safe space for the amphibians and for the people who come to look at them. And we never could have done that without the counts but from our volunteers year after year. So together, we've now crossed more than 53,000 amphibians since we started keeping good records. There are many more that people who'd never sent their counts into us that we don't know. Some of these are probably the same animal year in and year out, like those spotted salamanders. But in the scheme of how many amphibians there are in the Monadnock region, it's probably a drop in the bucket, but in the lives of those animals, it's another chance at breeding. It's another chance at surviving another year. So before I leave or answer some questions, some brief homework assignments. There's a volunteer handbook and you should read it, because if I missed anything, especially while I was rushing at the end, it'll be in there and it's on our website. You should watch that Nature Minute video from New Jersey. It's super fun. Don't do it tonight when you're sick of looking at a screen, but pick another day soon. It'll give you a really good sense of how to pick up amphibians and what it's like on a rainy night. That's also on our website. Get your field gear together. Sign up for our email list if you want to be associated with a specific site. And this is really exciting, I know, but in this day and age, we have liability waivers, and we'd love you to sign one if you're going to go out and volunteer with us. And I want to also mention, I'm working on a series of shorter YouTube videos. If you know people who you think want to do this and they missed tonight, rather than asking them to sit through a 90-minute Zoom with a bunch of polls that they can't participate in, we're going to chunk this out into 4 different training videos that will be up on our YouTube and on our Salamander Brigade webpage, hopefully by the end of next week. So that will be there. And if you're really interested in this, I'm doing one all about egg masses and vernal pools on April 3rd. So anyone who's still here, if you have questions, if you are confused, like this poor wood frog was confused, this actually happens more than you'd think because they don't have very good eyesight apparently and will grab onto anything. Sometimes on the roads, that's a bullfrog that the wood frog is grabbing onto. I want to thank you all for sticking with me, running a little late, but I'm happy to stick around for questions if you have them. So thank you all. We hope to see you soon on the roads. So Miles, are there any pressing questions that you want to bring forward?
Well, quite a few people were asking about the studies and some resources. So are you going to send out an email after this presentation?
So I'll have to see what those questions were. I definitely will send out an email either tomorrow or over the weekend that gives the links to the different, like the Nature Minute video on the website, the email sign up, and where the volunteer handbook is, and some of our internal resources. I wasn't necessarily planning to include specific studies, but if there are, I guess I would say if that's something that really interests you, drop me an email and I can share them with you. But I will send an email out to everyone who's here and everyone who registered and couldn't make it that points you in the right direction for finding what you need on our website.
And then you did answer it, but are on the checklist, are those all the salamanders that you might find in this area, or were there, how many species of salamanders are there in New Hampshire?
They're not all the salamanders that are in New Hampshire, because there are a few species that just aren't common at road crossings. So like, actually, so there's probably 2 or 3 other species that are like stream salamanders that I did not include, but it's most of the salamanders. If you want to see the full list for New Hampshire Fish and Game has all of the salamanders listed on their website. I can't remember exactly. I think there's maybe a dozen. Yeah, Karen says yeah. So most of them, but not all of them, because there's a few that are kind of exclusively stream dwellers. And I actually have found some of them on the roads, but it's really weird and doesn't normally happen. Any other big ones?
Hello? Can you hear me?
There's Joseph. Hello, Joseph.
I wanted to write comments or ask questions, but I don't know how. I got on just before you began, and I don't know how to put in a chat like that one just came up, Jessica Labrie. I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't want to talk out loud because I thought we were all being muted. So I'm still a little bit new to Zoom, at least in this particular.
That was your moment. You have a
Yeah,
question?
now's the moment. So what's your question or questions?
Oh, I had questions. Basically, one of them was, are we going to also look for ones that aren't on the list? You know, I think there was one New Hampshire record of a marbled salamander, for example, once.
If you find a marbled salamander, I want to hear about it. There are records of them in Hinsdale, and I think there's one other town where there's a record, but it's exceptionally, yeah, in Hollis, I think. So exceptionally rare. And I used to include them in this talk, and I just, because I was hoping someone in Chesterfield or Winchester would find one, but we're the very northern end of their range. So they're more common in Massachusetts. For those of you in Rhode Island, you might see them. They're actually
an example. Yeah.
They're fall breeders. So they actually migrate on rainy fall nights. So you're not necessarily likely to see them at the same time as these other guys.
Yeah, I did write a note. It wasn't a question. I've got a great 35 millimeter slide that I took years ago when I was teaching down at Groton School in Massachusetts. I got a red back, the white back or yellow back, and the lead back, gray phase, red back salamanders, all 3 in one picture. It's a great comparison.
I didn't really get into that here, but yeah, the redback salamanders are most commonly found with that rust red stripe down their back, but they have 2 other color phases. One is called lead back, where they're all gray. And then there's another one where they are called erythristic, where they're all orange and they kind of look like newts, except they still have really tiny legs, unlike newts, and no spots. So they do occur in other colors.
The ones I had were kind of creamy back, and I just call them white back, but I think that's the one that's described as yellow sometimes on the back. Yeah. I think I saw 3 in my whole life. Thank you.
All right, really thanks.
Informative and helpful.
Is there any more questions from any ones that I didn't get, Miles, that or that are pressing last questions that people have?
I have a quick question, if I could just ask. I'm in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and I'm new to this, and I just want to know how to hook up with somebody in this area.
So what I would recommend that you do, I do know that there are folks in Lebanon. I was contacted by someone in the ConsCom. They're hoping to get an effort going up there. And the best thing to do would either be to email me or to go through our email list sign up and specify Lebanon. And anyone who specifies Lebanon or Hanover, I'll put you all in touch with each other, or Karen will probably. But so you can go through the same email list sign up and just specify Lebanon, and hopefully we'll get a few people together. And also the Lebanon Conservation Commission, their website has Salamander Crossing Brigade information there that you can look up. And we've got a link to that from our website.
Great, thanks.
How can I be sure when a big night happens in the event I miss an email? Watch the weather. keep an eye on the weather and go to the salamander forecast whenever there's rain in the forecast, and we will, you know, that's the best way. And there's more than one. There's almost never just one. So if you miss one, there'll be more. Great. Well, I know we've got a lot of people. People are like been staring at a screen for an hour and a half, and you're ready to go and get on with the rest of your night. So I will leave you to it. But thank you all so much for sticking it out and for joining us and for joining the community of salamander people. We are glad to have you and look forward to hearing your stories and seeing your pictures and sharing them with everyone who's here.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you all so much. And you'll get an email from me soon.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Miles. Will you send me the chat, Miles, so that I can see what people were saying when I wasn't
Yeah, sure. It's
paying
long.
attention? That's fine.